God's grace and peace to you, friends, on this Lenten journey. I hope you're finding yourself refreshed and ready to explore a little bit more about our display. This week, we're going to be talking about two fairly difficult items to talk about: the sponge and nails. I hope that when we finish this time of worship together, that you'll be able to think a little maybe differently about these two items, that you might be able to say, even still, I want to take this journey. Hear again these words from Walter Brueggemann. The news is that God's wind is blowing. It may be a breeze that cools and comforts. It may be a gust that summons you home. It may be a storm that blows you where you've never been before. Wherever the wind is in your life, pay attention to it, and the blessing of God the Father, the Son, and the Spirit will abide with you always. Let's worship together.
Above all power, above all king, above all nature and all created things, above all wisdom and all the ways of man, you were here before the world began.
Above all kingdoms, above all thrones, above all wonders the world has ever known, above all wealth and treasures of the earth, there's no way to measure what you're worth.
Crucified and laid behind a stone, you lived to die, rejected and alone, like a rose trampled on the ground. You took the fall and thought of me above all. Above all power, above all king, above all nature and all created things, above all wisdom and all the ways of man, you were here before the world began.
Above all kingdoms, above all thrones, above all wonders the world has ever known, above all wealth and treasures of the earth, there's no way to measure what you're worth.
Crucified and laid behind a stone, you lived to die, rejected and alone, like a rose trampled on the ground. You took the fall and thought of me crucified and laid behind continue our Lenten walk exploring the nails and the sponge. In the Gospel of John, we read, "After this, when Jesus knew that it was now finished, he said, 'I am thirsty.' A jar full of sour wine was standing there. So they put a sponge full of the wine on a branch of hyssop and held it to his mouth. When Jesus had received the wine, he said, 'It is finished.' He then bowed his head and gave up his spirit." And while we think of the nails that would have been used to crucify Jesus, the story that follows his resurrection tells us of a different part of the story. Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." And after he said this, he showed them his hands and his side. Then the disciples rejoiced when they saw the Lord. But Thomas, who was called the twin, was one of the 12 and was not with them when Jesus came. So the other disciples told him, "We have seen the Lord." But he said to them, "Unless I see the mark of the nails in his hands, and put my finger in the mark of the nails and my hand in his side, I will not believe." A week later, his disciples were again in the house, and Thomas was with them. Although the doors were shut, Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." Then he said to Thomas, "Put your finger here and see my hands. Reach out your hand and put it in my side. Do not doubt, but believe." Thomas answered him, "My Lord, my God." Jesus said to him, "Have you believed because you have seen me? Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have come to believe."
Spirit of the living God, fall afresh on me. Spirit of the living God, fall afresh on me. Melt me, mold me, fill me, use me. Spirit of the living God, fall afresh on me.
Howdy, friends. Tonight we're going to talk about 2 of the last 3 of our objects. This week we're going to talk about the sponge and nails. So the nails and the sponge don't seem to go together, but they both have something to do with something in particular. But first let's talk about the sponge. This takes place in the story where Jesus is on the cross on the Good Friday day, struggling. And on the cross, as we've talked before, you didn't die from the wounds, you died from suffocation. And you'd be up there in the heat of the day, becoming thirstier and thirstier. And Jesus, like the prophets had told before in the stories, Jesus calls out, "I thirst." And so the soldiers, to mock him and make things difficult, take the sponge on a stick and dip it into a jar of sour wine, our term's vinegar, and say, "Here you go. Have a drink. Does that quench your thirst?" And it leads me to the question, what do you thirst for? I mean, Lord knows, I often thirst for a really good beer. But is that really what I thirst for? Not so much. Jesus calls us to thirst for justice, for righteousness, for goodness. And in asking for the thirst, "I thirst," he says, they give him a symbol of a corrupt world, of the soured wine, the vinegar, the bitter gall, as it's written, that says, this is one more way to humiliate, to make you struggle, to make you regret. Shortly thereafter, Jesus dies. And in the same way, we think of nails. Now, if you've looked at this nail, you've picked this up, you're going to say, well, this isn't very sharp. It's not. This isn't a standard nail. This is what's known in our world as a masonry nail. Masonry, of course, is cement. You take one of these and you can pound it into a brick wall. They're tempered, they're hardened, and they're not sharp, because that's not the point. It's to hold fast. Without getting into the gruesome details, because let's be honest, being nailed to a cross, there's nothing not gruesome at all about it. But in the ancient world, how they would do it, they would put nails right in between your wrists, in between the two bones on both sides. They would break your legs, and then they would nail your ankles up. Terrifying, terrible, not life-threatening. But it would be painful, and it would linger on. And that's part of the nail. But then the story goes, as Jesus comes after Good Friday, after he is resurrected, he comes to the disciples after he's talked to the women at the tomb, and he shows them the wounds. And they say, Lord. And the story goes down a little ways, and then Thomas is there and says, well, I didn't see this. I don't know this. How could I possibly know this? And he says to Thomas, if you need the proof that it's me, touch the wounds. Feel them. Feel the hole in my side from the spear. Know that I am who I say I am. And he falls to his knee and says, Lord. And he says, blessed are those who believe and have not seen, encouraging us all to deeper faith. From this little instrument that causes so much pain comes a story of redemption for the disciples, for Thomas, for us, and love. In the passing on of things like bitter wine and nails, we are encouraged and called to live more deeply and fully in this world and in this life for goodness, to take those things that are so tough and turn them into something better, for not just ourselves, but for all. When you see nails, when you see sponges, think of both the difficulty and tragedy of the situation, but think also of the goodness, the love that comes out in spite of these tough times.
Oh Lord, what wondrous love is this, that you would lay your whole life down. You traded heavenly glory for flesh and bone and pain, to die for our redemption upon that cross of shame.
Oh, people, lift your hands. Oh, let his praises ring. Salvation's drawing near. Our home, behold the suffering King. And you did us example show. Though high, you stooped to meet us low. You gathered the discarded, you came to find the lost, to raise a mighty kingdom, a kingdom of the cross. Oh, people, lift your hands and let his praises ring. Salvation's drawing near. Our home, behold the suffering King. Our home, behold the suffering King.
And now, await God's present, not as you expect, hope, or imagine, but just as it is in the moment.
Allow a sense of God's presence to come and be what it is, no matter your expectations.
Accept as a gift whatever comes or does not come. Accept that you are not in charge. Accept the infinity of God's presence.
Attend to where you are called, to all the ways God invites you to join in the work of God's kingdom. Until we meet again, amen.
God be with you till we meet again. By his counsel's guide uphold.